Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. So we now begin session 6 of the IRF 2025 annual conference, which we have titled Delivery Mechanisms for Sustainable Roads. Thank you very much for joining us on this final day of the programme, and we hope you've had a great show so far. At the IRF, we understand that sustainability is only meaningful when it is embedded across the entire value chain, from the earliest planning decisions to financing, design, procurement, construction, material sourcing, operations, maintenance, and ultimately end-of-life practices. As you can see, this value chain is vast and it is interconnected. It includes governments, financiers, consultants, contractors, operators, and increasingly digital technology providers who collectively shape how today's road mobility systems operate. Sustainable roads are therefore not the outcome of one single intervention, but the result of many actors making better and more sustainable decisions at every stage, such as how to incentivize low carbon materials and circular practices, how to strengthen local industries and supply chains, how to mobilize financing in ways that reward greener innovation, and how to create fair, future ready jobs in the road sector. Today's session brings together these perspectives through thought leaders who are each of them shaping these delivery mechanisms from the perspective of environmental sustainability. Their perspectives complement each other and reflect the diversity of the modern roads ecosystem. I will not read their biographies, which are quite extensive, but let me briefly introduce the speakers in the order in which they will intervene. Daniel Hornet is a Senior Programme Officer with the World Wildlife Fund Sustainable Infrastructure Initiative, bringing deep experience in environmental review, resilience, and nature-positive approaches across global infrastructure projects. He will be followed by Michael Anyala, Senior Road Asset Management Specialist at the Asian Development Bank, working across Asia on maintenance systems, institutional strengthening, and sustainable asset management. Ali Al-Kassoum is the Executive Secretary of ARMFA, representing national road maintenance funds across Africa and championing more sustainable, predictable financing for road networks. Spencer Brigler will be joining us next. He is the International Business Director at TRL, offering applied research insights on digital innovation, sustainability assessment tools, and evidence-based policy for transport systems. Lastly, Basma Issa is the Head of Policy, ESG and Sustainability at FIDIC and Project Manager for the FIDIC Carbon Management Framework, one of the leading whole-life carbon tools for infrastructure delivery. We will begin, as with previous sessions, with 5-minute opening presentations from each panelist before moving into a moderated discussion and questions from the audience. As a reminder, if you've joined us with previous sessions, you're very welcome to ask questions throughout by using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will try to answer as many as time permits. Thank you all in advance for keeping to the time limit. And Daniel, I believe the floor is yours now.
Great. Thank you so much, Brendan. Can you see me?
We can indeed.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to have WWF participate in this session. Been very excited to be here. My name is Daniel Hornet. I'm a Senior Program Officer at the WWF Sustainable Infrastructure Program, and my background's in civil engineering. Before joining WWF, I worked for a municipal government doing land use planning and the oversight of design and construction of public and private road development. And I often get asked why WWF is involved in a conference like this, focus on roads or focus on infrastructure. And I think simply I can just say that roads are one of the most significant interfaces between human development and nature. They're a critical service. They're critical for both humans and the ecology. Roads shape how people access services and economic opportunities. They also shape how wildlife moves and how ecosystems function and how landscapes respond to climate impacts. They can contribute to devastating environmental impacts, but they're also a key opportunity for conservation. I'd like to go to the next slide, please, Brendan. According to the latest World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet report published in 2024, wildlife populations have declined on an average of 73% across the world since 1970. Unfortunately, roads and other linear infrastructure can be major contributors to this through fragmentation, pollution, carbon emissions, and the fishbone effect. A study came out recently that found for every kilometer of new first cut road in the Congo Basin, that created or led to almost 5 kilometers of new second cut road or new secondary roads off of that first cut road. And when you look at that in the Brazilian Amazon, that number goes up to almost 50 kilometers of secondary roads created for every kilometer of first cut road. So getting it right the first time is critical. And as we can see here, and some of you may have heard, there's a huge opportunity to do this. McKinsey recently estimated that more than $100 trillion will be invested in infrastructure over the next 15 years. The opportunity is enormous if we can influence even a fraction of that at the planning, the financing, and the design stage. Can dramatically reduce biodiversity loss and increase resilience for our communities and for our infrastructure and provide key services that keep our ecosystems healthy. Next slide, please, Brendan. So it just so happens that we often want to build roads perpendicular to the ways that nature wants to flow. And two of the most important pathways where we can see this in action are hydrologic flows and wildlife movement. Roads cut across natural drainage systems, which affects water movement, sediment transport, and flood dynamics. And we're pretty used to designing for these. We know how to build good bridges. We know how to design culverts that allow for the flood-free board that we need for resilient roads to ensure that we maintain these services during major events. But what we're not used to thinking about is the ways that wildlife wants to cross these roads too, oftentimes following along in the same hydrologic corridors or ecological transport corridors. So animals move across the landscapes following these natural corridors in the same way that water often flows perpendicular to our roads. And without safe crossings, these wildlife populations can become isolated and they try to cross the roads anyways, which leads to vehicle collisions and genetic diversity decrease. In the United States alone, over 1 million wildlife are struck by vehicles per day, which results in thousands of injuries and billions of dollars in costs every year. This is an important thing, not just for wildlife safety, but for human safety and for safety of our assets and ensuring that these services are maintained on our roads and that we're providing a safe option. And these can include some of the solutions that we see in this image here. There's overpasses or green bridges for wildlife to cross over our roads. You can design underpasses where they go underneath. We know how to design canopy bridges for arboreal species that need that typically move through the trees and through the canopies. And we know how to design culverts to modify them that allows in ways that allow wildlife to use them as crossings as well. These interventions improve road safety and they're important for ecological connectivity, which might not always seem like a top priority in road design. But as we'll see in the next click, please, these impacts aren't just one directional. Roads are also dependent on nature. Healthy ecosystems stabilize slopes and absorb stormwater, prevent erosion, and they buffer and protect roads from floods and extreme weather. And we know now that we can invest in nature-based solutions for things like flood mitigations upstream in ways that they can be more effective and provide benefits to a greater population than just investing in on-site mitigation measures. So I encourage you to think outside the land about the land tenure outside of the road development corridor and look for opportunities to invest in nature in ways that will serve the road and the community around it. As we can see in this example, this is from a project called the Sustainable Infrastructure Program in Asia, which was led by OECD and funded by the International Climate Initiative. And through this project, WWF helped to develop the Nature-Based Solutions NBS Mapper. We did this in partnership with the governments in Indonesia and the Philippines. We used spatial analysis to identify ecosystems that provide resilience benefits to both roads and to people. And this is with the goal of integrating these types of nature-based solution opportunities into the transport planning process. So the team used the natural capital invest models to assess the ecosystem services that you can see on the screen. That's flood attenuation, sediment retention, groundwater recharge, and coastal protection. And by doing so, they identified areas of land that provide these services to roads and communities. Based on this assessment and climate modeling, priority areas were targeted where conservation and restoration work can be most effective at providing these services to the roads and communities downstream of them. As you can see in this example, this is the island of Sabah in Indonesia. It's a relatively intact landscape, so there are a lot of areas that are providing services. But you can imagine how this might change and look different in a more developed landscape, where the areas that are providing services are more evident and more standalone, but the areas for restoration are even create a greater opportunity. So this approach can help when you're prioritizing routes for new roads. By identifying priority restoration areas early in the project design, you can incorporate them as key project components to avoid costly and complicated mitigation or offsetting measures once you get to the impact assessment phase. And on top of this, nature-based solutions are shown to have reduced lifetime operational and maintenance costs compared to traditional gray solutions. So we really need to start making the shift to look at full life cycle cost assessment, where these start to have a benefit over traditional gray solutions. Next slide, please, Brendan. This is the last one here, where I'm just going to talk about a little bit about the mindset shift that we need to create. Wildlife-friendly measures, nature-based solutions, and ecosystem-based adaptations need to become core parts of how we build roads that not only withstand climate and other shocks, but they protect the ecosystems that also in turn protect the roads. It goes both ways. Instead of viewing the environment as a hurdle, we should view nature as infrastructure that helps deliver long-term performance in the systems that we're building. And on the other side of that, we need to see the development of infrastructure as an opportunity to go beyond just mitigation or compensating for impacts that we may create. We need infrastructure to take on a nature positive mindset where each project helps build up the natural systems that have been degraded and that we are relying on for our own human activities. So my recommendation, and then I'll wrap up here. I just want to be clear. We need to improve how environmental impacts are assessed early in the process by considering these natural flows at the earliest stages of policy, planning, and design, and incorporate nature-based solutions and ecosystem services assessment so that we can design roads that serve both people and the ecosystem. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I mean, two of the figures that you quoted struck me. I was not actually familiar with them. For the next 15 years, 25 million kilometers of roads built and in excess of $100 trillion of investments. Without a doubt, some of these investments will come from multilateral development banks. So it's particularly fitting that Michael will join us now and perhaps tell us how one of these development banks is thinking about these topics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brendan, and also for inviting the Asian Development Bank to this important meeting. So as you heard earlier, I'm from the Transport Sector Office at ADB, and I just wanted to mention that the Asian Development Bank supports about 50 countries that are regionally based within Asia. And also the transport sector at ADB is one of the biggest sector in terms of portfolio. But that portfolio has changed a lot over the last 15 or so years. So way back in 2010, around 80% of our portfolio in the transport sector was roads. Right now, that figure is around 50%. So it represents a shift in the way that we see demand coming from our countries, but it's also more balanced in terms of ensuring sustainable transport system as a whole. So if you can go to next, please. So I wanted to start by sharing with you a few challenges and opportunities that we see in terms of supporting our client countries to ensure that they plan, prepare, and operate sustainable roads. So ADB, like many multilateral development banks, committed to the Paris Agreement on climate change. So what that means is that all our operations have to ensure that they comply with the requirements of Paris Agreement. So that was about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And to help our project teams and client countries to achieve this, we developed what we call the ADB Green Roads Toolkit. So that has 9 dimensions that you see on the right there: decarbonization, resilience, water and land management, pollution, quality of life, biodiversity protection, disaster preparedness, sustainable materials, and inclusive growth. So the idea of this was that if we're preparing roads for our client countries, we would like to follow a holistic sustainability approach around all these criteria. And what this toolkit has is around about 150 best practice case studies and growing. And then project teams use this for their project preparation. Now, what are some of the issues that lead to this? So Asia, as you may know, has a population of about 60% of the global population, but it only has about 40% of the road network globally. So there's a huge infrastructure deficit. There's also a huge demand going forward. Now, if you compare that with, let's say, OECD countries, 70 kilometers of roads in OECD countries serve 1,000 people, while in Asia, low middle income countries are about 4. So it's a huge gap. Next. So then the other issue that I want to highlight is a challenge is really climate resilience. So the current delivery model in terms of climate resilience really needs to be looked at, because currently we mostly design roads based on past experience of climate. We need to be looking forward and say, how is the climate going to look like in the future? What impacts will we have now in infrastructure? What impacts will it have on the use of our infrastructure, including roads? And then ensure that we design for resilience. So the point here is that the current delivery model in terms of addressing climate resilience is really not strong enough, and this needs to change. And we know that in Asia, most of our countries are highly exposed. So you can see there on the left, for example, most of the exposure for transport infrastructure is on roads because they are dominant infrastructure. On the right, you can see countries that are vulnerable. And the ones in colored are Asian countries, and then in dark the rest of the world. Next. So then another important critical aspect of the value chain when we talk about roads is really material usage. So the point I wanted to mention here is that within Asia, I mentioned earlier that we have about 40% of the global road network. But however, the embodied emissions from materials is 45%, so much higher than the proportion of roads that we have. And also what we see is that construction materials is big business. So within transport itself, about probably 80 to 90% of construction materials would be for roads in terms of construction of roads and also maintenance. And you can see from the right graph that there's a positive correlation between material stock flows as well as GDP per capita. So then the question is the current delivery model right, where we basically, take the materials, we use them, and then we dispose of. So this is obviously not sustainable given the embodied emissions and the demand that's required for this material. So we need to rethink how we actually address this particular challenge. Next. Then lastly, I wanted to close by really an opportunity. So one area that we really are trying to focus on is how can we make sure that our roads are not just sustainable, but they're also inclusive. So ADB recently launched a gender equality in transport toolkit, as well as website, to really try and mainstream gender balance within the transport sector. Unfortunately, in our region, about only 14% of women are employed within the transport sector, and yet the sector employs almost 150 million people. So there's a big opportunity there if we can make sure that in future investments, we embed more gender balance in terms of mainstreaming gender in our transport system. So we're trying to do that now. In terms of corporate target, the aim is that by 2030, we expect 60% of all our investments to have gender mainstreaming included. Okay, so this was my last slide. So Brendan, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. We are now switching geographies and move into Africa, where Ali will join us. And Ali, I'm sure that a number of the topics that Michael brought up in his presentation, whether the road density challenge, the availability of construction materials, or indeed gender mainstreaming, probably also resonate with you. So, Ali, if you would like to open your camera and your microphone, and you are very warmly welcome to the stage.
Okay, thank you for IRAF for convening this important discussion. As Executive Secretary of ANFA, representing 35 African road fund maintenance, over 300,000 kilometers of roads across the continent. As you know, in Africa, delivering sustainable roads is not just a technical ambition. It is a strategy necessary for economic activities, social inclusion, climate resilience, and regional integration. And as the session guidelines highlight, sustainability must be embedded across the entire road value chain, from planning and the financing through construction and the materials to maintenance, innovation, and end-of-life management. Our vision as an association is to be a key player in sustainable performance in innovative finance of roads. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. As you know, the African paradox as a context, global issue. How to do a global issue? Our context, popular growth. Africa's population is set to increase by 1 billion individual by 2050, with 60 living in urban areas. Funding gap annual infrastructure needs of 130 to 117 billion dollars, according to African Development Bank. As they study, they do the survey. The road condition, only 50% of rural roads are in good conditions, affecting 70% of the population that depend on these roads. This is a big challenge. The first one is road safety. Highest road mortality rates worldwide due to deteriorate infrastructure. For the climate resilience, increasing vulnerability of roads to extreme climate events with high repairing costs. As you see in this image, it's a very big challenge. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Yes, I believe there's a short time lag, but we are on your reconsidering roads, our strategic axis slide now.
Okay. Now, as a reconsidering roads, what's our strategy in AMFA? We have 3 axes to include safe, green, and efficient mobility. Green. The first one is green and innovative financing, which the green bonds attracting capital for environmental responsible road projects. The ecological public-private partnership to engage in the private sector with clear environmental and social objectives. For the climate funds, is to access to green, climate fund, and similar mechanics. For the circular economy and innovation, we have to use circular materials, plastics, construction, debris aggregate for pavement. For the construction technique, we promoting less energy intensive and more resilient methods. So you have to strategy to align our strategy by integration the circular economic action plan. The African Union aims to transform waste into resource and promote sustainable models. For the capacity building for SMEs, sustainable construction. So we have to look about the local material production for the employment creation to the investment. That's why we plan a sustainable roads must start by training and also the resilience industry. The next, can I have the last one?
Yes, we are on your call to action slide.
Yeah, you can. So I will finish by our call action. Let's build the highway tomorrow for tomorrow by collaborating engagement to transform challenge into the opportunity. As I said, we have many challenges. So we have 3 pillars. The incentive regular. The first one is the incentive regulatory framework. Adopt policies supporting green bonds, ecological partnership, and access to climate funds for sustainable road infrastructure. The second one is about the research and the innovation. Investing in R&D to develop circular economy solution, such as using recycled plastics and construction debris aggregates. For partnership is to set a robust platform by capacity training. That's we look about our commitment in ANFA to reaffirm its commitment to collaborate closely with all key players, Africa, innovative, private. Our call action is the future of African mobility is not decreed, it is built together. Let's reconsider and build together roads that unite us and make us prosper sustainability.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you. You contract my presentation. The first one, as you say, I have just 3 slides. It's very difficult to summarize the presentation.
Absolutely. Yes. I think we got a sense of, ARMFA's overall commitments. Congratulations for that. And thank you for leaving us with this very inspiring quote. Another inspiring quote we heard in the previous session, in fact, was, if my notes are correct, infrastructure is destiny. So perhaps we'll invite Spencer at this point to tell us if infrastructure is in fact destiny, and to share some insights from their work.
Okay. Oh my goodness. So that's quite a big challenge to define destiny. So so thanks a lot. So a quick introduction to TRL. Probably most relevant for this group is TRL's very active in setting standards in road design, maintenance, and planning. Active in a number of countries, actually in Asia, Bangladesh in particular, actually in that region as well, in India, but also in Africa, in Zambia, Uganda, Mozambique, Kenya, etc. So in that particular area, but also looking very much around road and asset management and use of new materials and so on, as well as road safety. So next slide, please. So what I'm trying to do here, actually, in the next few minutes, is just really sort of challenge a little bit of thinking. So what in fact, this is not TRL's view. I think this is a global view that when we look at the lifetime value, if you like, or the life cycle of road infrastructure, clearly the majority of emphasis is put on construction at the early phases. Now, of course, that's really important, but what we see is that there needs to be a much stronger emphasis on maintenance. And indeed, in fact, when we look at the proportion of money that's allocated, then really putting emphasis on maintenance is a critical factor. And actually, where my link really is to this overall theme of this session is that if we can make that emphasis on maintenance, we can then start to facilitate more of the value that can be generated from, for example, reducing emissions, enabling the roads to be greener, and indeed embracing a circular economy. So next slide, please. So fundamentally, part of that, though, is really, and where TRL, in fact, is very much focusing, is around the use of data and digitization. So, in fact, if I could link back to actually some of my colleagues on this call. So Daniel, for example, talked about 60% of emissions come from poorly planned infrastructure. I would also say that a large part of that is poorly maintained infrastructure as well. We need to do less bad stuff. We need to do more good stuff. All of that can be enabled through more efficient and effective maintenance. And indeed, was commented by the last speaker about the fact that we should be using recycling and potentially new materials. Well, within a maintenance regime, we can actually configure that. We can look at the benefits in terms of money and maintenance value, if you like, from introducing new materials and so on. And all this slide is trying to show is that when we look at road authorities and what they can access in terms of tools and capability, a large number of those requirements needed for an efficient and sustainable operation are underpinned by data and digitization and the tools that are made available for that. Next slide, please. So really what I'm trying to do is make the direct causal link here is that when we look at maintenance, we're looking at being able to link that to some of these elements within introducing and maintaining nature-based designs and also emissions reduction. So, for example, there is no reason why tree planting and other factors cannot be part of an ongoing maintenance plan, as you would with any other activity within the road infrastructure support. When we look at resilience, again, introducing new methods to make the roads more resilient is something that can be part of the maintenance planning and can be informed by data that's collected. I mean, just a very quick segue into an example in India, where we've been working very much in the Kerala region. What we've been introducing there is predictive flood mapping into the road and asset management process. So yes, we're looking at road and asset management as a key factor in underpinning maintenance. But if we can introduce, for example, the high risk areas from flooding, we can actually embellish the overall maintenance planning with those risk factors as well included. Next slide, please. So one of the areas that we also think is very important, again, is a lot of this is embedded all the time in looking at the value of the infrastructure which we're maintaining and which is also supporting some of these other environmental factors. So this is just two examples here, where we're seeing that if we can actually improve maintenance, we enable ultimately consistent journey times, economic certainty and investment and flows from that, and then we get an improved support for the local community in terms of GDP and so on. We can create local employment and more engagement by the local communities in their own road infrastructure. I think, again, last speaker spoke about Africa, where rural roads are a critical element within the local community and the local the way in which that community is supported. So again, if we can embed local employment, local economy of growth, and so on, and ultimately return for those local communities, then that will bring benefit, and it will bring benefits in being able to increase the value and therefore the investment in some of these factors which we see as important. So I'm going to leave it there because I know we're tight for time, and you can skip over my next two slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer, and thank you already for reacting to some of the content you heard from our previous panelists. So that sets kind of really the stage for the Q&A portion of our panel. But before we get there, we would love to hear from Basma Isa with FIDIC.
Thank you, Brandon. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, IRF, for bringing us together. First, I would like to apologize for my voice. I have a bit of a cold, but I'm very happy to be here. I'm Basma Isa, Head of Policy, ESG, and Sustainability at FIDIC, the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, the global federation representing consulting engineering firms in more than 100 countries. Our members are the engineers and firms who plan, design, and supervise the delivery of transport infrastructure worldwide. So when we speak about road sustainability, we speak from inside the system. So the people who translate national ambitions into real build assets every day. First slide, please. Thank you. Across our global network, we see the same pattern. Governments raising their climate and resilient ambitions, but the delivery systems are not yet calibrated to achieve them. And from FIDIC's point, working with MDBs, road agencies, and many industry leaders, we see a very clear opportunity. If we can strengthen early stage decisions, procurement frameworks, and capacity building across the value chain, roads can become much lower carbon, more resilient, and far more cost effective over the long term. Which brings me to the core challenge. Next slide, please. So the delivery gap. In many countries, the sustainability challenge in roads is not the absence of good ideas or technologies. It's actually the misalignment of the systems that are meant to deliver them. So across projects globally, we consistently observe four bottlenecks. Procurement still rewards the lowest upfront price. So not whole life performance, which means low carbon materials, circular options, and resilient design rarely win. And the second is that carbon and life cycle assessments, they exist, but they're often done late. And they don't influence tender scoring or design decisions from early stage. And the third is the digital tools. They're available, but their insights aren't embedded in contracts. So they don't shape real outcomes. They come as niche and not as a necessity. Also, the last is the local supply chain and the lack of capability and stability. And this is especially with small, medium enterprises who are essential for maintenance and long-term resilience. So the outcome would be predictable. Of course, conventional road designs continue to dominate, locking in higher emissions, higher maintenance cost, and lower resilience. And this gap is not a technical one, actually. It's and not a motivational one. It's more of a system gap. So the rules and incentives and processes along the value chain are not aligned with the outcomes countries desire. But the good news is that this is a gap that's fixable, which brings me to the contribution FIDIC can give. Next slide, please. So at FIDIC, we've been working with governments, MDBs, and industries to close this gap through three levers: procurement, carbon management, and capacity. In procurement reform, we need a shift from lowest cost to value-based procurement that accounts for carbon, resilience, and whole life performance. And FIDIC's contract forms and procurement guidance, they're designed to help clients embed these specific criteria systematically, so sustainable choices would become part of the rule and not just an optional extra. The second one is the carbon management framework. And let me just give you a very brief introduction. The carbon management framework, the CMF, is one of our key contributions at FIDIC. It developed over several years of industry input from global experts, and it provides a simple, practical step-by-step process for managing carbon from the earliest stage of a project. So it's not another high-level guidance, but it's a framework that operates at a project level where decisions are actually made early on. So let me highlight three features of the CMF. The first one is that it's project-based and flexible. So the CMF recognizes that not all projects start at the same level of readiness. So it includes a maturity assessment tool. And this helps agencies or consultants, anyone within the project lifecycle, to recommend realistic, specific, stage-based advice according to their maturity level. So it's not a one-size-fits-all requirement, but it supports progress step by step. The second is that it links digital tools and carbon data and procurement decisions. So the CMF would show how to embed carbon and resilience considerations directly into design choices, tender documents, and the evaluation criteria. So we would close this assessment delivery gap that I mentioned earlier. It's also an open source, so we designed it so industries and governments and MDBs and suppliers and engineering teams can adopt it freely. Also, a framework alone is not enough. So our third point here that we can help with through FIDIC is capability and local supply chains. So none of this would shift without people. So that means building capacity in agencies, SMEs, contractors, and consultants, particularly in emerging economies. So, and through FIDIC's training programs and partnerships with MDBs, we support governments to strengthen their procurement and resilience planning capability by creating future-ready jobs and more resilient local supply chain. So we see we're not short on solutions in the road sector. We're short on systems that let those solutions land well. If we connect the ambition to delivery through better procurement and project-based carbon management and stronger local capability, sustainable roads can become the standard everywhere. And this is where FIDIC and the Global Engineering Network is ready to work with everyone to make this practical shift happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Basma. And IRF would certainly be happy to be part of this discussion as we share many of the same viewpoints. Thank you to all speakers for these insightful contributions. I'm now going to invite you perhaps to open your cameras again as we enter the panel discussion segment of the event. Let me just stop sharing my screen, perhaps. And thank you again also for the questions that have come in. In the interest of time, I will endeavor to skillfully weave them into my questions to you. Basma, we will in fact stay with you just for a moment before moving back to Daniel. So looking across the value chain, planning, procurement, construction, operations. So the question really is, where do you see the most impactful opportunity to embed sustainability at scale, given some of the figures that we heard Daniel present in his initial overview? And what's one policy, procurement, or industry practice that would unlock faster global adoption? And I'll ask Daniel pretty much the same question as well.
That's an interesting one because we actually work very closely with WWF and with Daniel on that. And I think the biggest opportunity lies in integrating sustainability upstream. So during planning, procurement, and contracting, rather than relying on downstream fixes in construction or maintenance. So if I had to choose one high impact change, it would be to make value-based procurement the global default. So this single shift would activate everything else. It would enable digital materials and innovative construction methods. It would support digital monitoring. It would reduce the life cycle emissions and cost, creating incentives for contractors and everyone in the whole life cycle of a project to propose greener, higher quality solutions. And this would strengthen the supply chain. So from a policy perspective, governments and financiers should require that sustainability outcomes, carbon reductions and resilience and durability, and the social value, of course, are specified clearly and evaluated systematically. So procurement rules then would shape the industry behavior and change them along the whole life value chain.
Thank you. And I'm sure I see Daniel nodding in agreement, but please do come in and shed some insights. And you may have seen one of the questions addressed to you more specifically in the Q&A. And I think this also speaks to maybe the kind of the grassroots component also that, this is where WWF kind of, emanates from in terms of shedding light on this often overlooked challenge. So I guess the question we had for you from the audience also was, what can we do more as mobility and transport professionals to bring this subject to the fore? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brendan, and thanks for that great question from the audience. And also thank you to Basma for teeing this up so well, because I completely agree that the most effective interventions are going to be at those early stage of planning and design, or planning and procurement, really before you even get to the design stage. And this is everything from we need the data, right? We need to know what impacts we're trying to avoid. We need to know the biodiversity important areas and these areas that provide ecosystem services so that we can avoid having impacts, but that we can also invest in the systems that contribute back to roads. We need to integrate these values into procurement, as Basma said, and set performance targets for these natural and these nature-based systems so that we can find ways to share responsibility and liability between the project teams to make sure that these natural systems are not only created, but maintained and operational in the long term so that they have the performance that's desired, both for the ecosystem and for the infrastructure itself. And then how do we start to bring this more to light? I think it's conversations like these. This has been a really interesting conversation with such good breadth of expertise on the panel. And my approach to this conversation was to try and broaden the definition of sustainability a little bit. A lot of times we get caught into this carbon management, carbon embodiment, and the resilience question, but it's also these ecosystem services. It's also the ways that our infrastructure interacts with wildlife and with our local communities. And so I think bringing those conversations more to light and then creating coordination systems where we can bring together different stakeholders. For example, in Mongolia, WWF has helped set up a coordination platform between the ministries of transportation and the ministries of environment. And that's resulted in wildlife-friendly passage standards for roads and rails. And so we need to sort of get more people into the room and have a systems thinking approach where we look at all of these things as a system, because transport is just one service that is provided. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We're going to spend a bit more time now discussing asset management and maintenance and where it fits into that overall picture. So the next group of questions will be addressed to Michael and Ali in particular, and perhaps building on some of the insights that Spencer shared as well in his presentation. So perhaps to Michael, also as an asset management specialist, I think that's your kind of original calling, and you've highlighted ADB's approach to lifecycle asset management. So where do you see the most promising opportunities for climate-aligned asset management to accelerate sustainable road operations? And as a bonus question from the audience, recent events have shown Asia struggling with natural calamities, and we saw examples of those in Nepal yesterday, typhoons, floods, and others. And the question, I guess, is whether you're also connecting, beyond kind of the national ministries of finance, national levels of government, etc., but also with local governments and an ecosystem of, broader stakeholders in terms of delivering capacity and resources. Thank you. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, lots of questions, Brendan. No, I think it's a very good questions, really. So I think to start with, Basma and Daniel already mentioned, I think the key area where we can make the most impact is this upstream decision making, at the planning stage, even prioritizing how best to use limited financing. So, for example, to give you an example, so within Asia and the Pacific, basically we estimate that the transport infrastructure gap is around $2.9 trillion, dollars. So that is the amount of money countries will need to be able to invest in transport infrastructure up to 2035 and meet the SDGs. Now, this is huge, yeah? And then out of that, they will need to invest probably around maybe $2 billion a year to climate-proof this infrastructure, including roads. So clearly, there's not enough money. So the best way to do this is to then prioritize. So which investments will maximize the resilience of our transport systems? So then you can spend your limited funding in the best way possible. So one of the things that we have been doing over the last years is really this multi-hazard risk analysis of transport systems, understanding which transport links are most critical, and then being able to highlight where hotspots for investments are within countries. So this then will allow us to then have this discussion with countries, whether it is national or local government level, and say, for your overall planning, you may want to think about addressing this specific hotspots of roads, because this will improve the most resilience given the limited funding. And that then goes into the pipeline and then comes to ADB. So that kind of discussion is really important to ensure that we can drive countries forward, ensure that we improve their own planning processes, as well as asset management systems, so that they can actually do this themselves. So that by the time that investments comes to ADB, we are investing in projects that we know will improve sustainability in the future. Another area I wanted to touch on very briefly is the financing, and Brendan also mentioned that previously on particularly maintenance. Now, this is not new. We know that in most of our countries, maintenance is underfunded. Yeah. The question is, how can we have a dialogue with governments to say you need to increase this volume of funding because this is really important. So what you've done recently is to really say, rather than speaking to the Minister of Transport, we want to speak to the Minister of Finance and say, this is the amount of revenue that the road sector provides to your country. Often it's a huge amount of money. Now, can we get a portion of that to make sure that you can actually finance roads properly, maintain them properly? And we have done some analysis to show them, the revenue that comes from the road sectors, and also what's the gap and then what they need to do. And it's a very interesting discussion because then we hope that this will lead into a shift in mindset in terms of how roads are maintained.
I think this is a perfect opportunity to bring in Ali Al Kassoum into the conversation. Asia, for some reason, does not have an equivalent association to ARMFA, but Africa does, and is leading the way through many of the commitments which Ali shared earlier. So, Ali, the same question to you in terms of in this kind of challenging environment in terms of kind of resource availability, how do we nonetheless try to operate a shift in mindsets towards climate aligned asset management? And there was one further question for you, Ali, that also came in through the audience, and you addressed briefly the topic of circular economy as one of the areas that you would like to prioritize, rightfully so. Circular economy can also face a number of economic challenges, and the question is, have you kind of looked into the return on investment from this effort to prioritize circular economies, and are we able to see those changes immediately, impact in our sector? Ali, if you'd like to share some thoughts on these questions. And you're currently muted, just as a reminder.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. As you say, the impact opportunity, the most impact opportunity is a systematic introduction of green and performance-based procurement. If every contract include clear, measurable, sustainability requirements, such as recycled asphalt quota, low carbon materials, or durability indicator, then sustainability becomes mandatory rather than optional. The most urgent global change is for governments and financiers to adopt procurement rules and reward sustainability performance, not only lowest upfront cost. For us, in AMFA, our key message, sustainability begins at the planning and design stage. Financing must become greener, more innovative, and performance-based. African SMEs must be prioritized and strengthened. Digitalization should be accelerated and shared across countries. Circular solution should be mainstream and standardized. So IRF and AMFA and other partners must collaborate in a strategic level for African transformation.
Thank you very much for that call to action. And IRF will certainly respond. Spencer, I think we will give you the final word. TRL obviously works at the intersection of research, sustainability, and digital transformation, as we saw. You presented an array of tools that are, digital tools and others that are available to governments. And inevitably, the question will be which of these tools, whether digital twins, materials testing, emission modeling or standards, offers, in your view, the strongest potential to transform sustainability outcomes for these road agencies? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, and there was a long list there, but I think the point was really that a road authority has available to them plenty of tools, and I think the point I would make here is that we have a challenge to enable the ministries and indeed the road authorities to have the best tools for their use, and I think the two main areas, at least in our experience, that we would suggest is, first of all, ensure that there's a good set of national standards for design and so on, and that they are modern, and they give the ability for road construction in particular to be using the latest thinking and the latest knowledge. The second part is, yes, let's ensure, and I think Michael also alluded to it, that there's a sustainable maintenance funding available to allow those road authorities to continue to maintain the roads going forward. And yes, this requires money, and it requires long-term money. It doesn't require just money for the initial project. We need to ensure that there's funding well beyond that. So I think I would summarize it in those two fundamental areas.
Thank you for that. And thank you again, keeping an eye on the time. Unfortunately, that's probably all we're going to have time for in terms of the discussion. So thank you for sharing these insightful contributions. And to the audience, I have to say, for their very high level of engagement. There were a number of further questions addressed to Basma in particular in the Q&A. But by a stroke of good luck, you will have an opportunity to ask Basma these questions directly. For those of you attending Intertraffic Amsterdam in March next year, because IRF and FIDIC will be collaborating on a session that will pick up on many of the topics that we've addressed today. So 12th of March 2026, I apologize. So please keep those dates in your agendas, and we look forward to continuing that conversation with all of you. So in wrapping up, I think today's discussion made it clear that sustainability obviously is not a single intervention, but a system of aligned decisions across planning, construction, operations, and especially funding. When these pieces come together with supportive procurement and innovative contract tools, some of which were highlighted by FIDIC, the result is a road sector that delivers long-term value for communities, economies, and the planet. So on behalf of the IRF, thank you for being part of this conversation. So we look forward to continuing the dialogue, as I mentioned, at Intertraffic next year, so well beyond today's conference. However, please do stay on for our closing session, due to begin in just a few minutes. Thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of the day.